Special meeting. Today is Tuesday, February the 8th, 2011, room 1050, and it is about 10 after 2 in the afternoon. Present at this time are the chair, Ms. Perry, Mr. Cardenas, and Mr. Koretz. Since all items on the agenda are related to the same issue, I think unless anyone has an objection, we should take them all up at the same time. And I think the first thing we should do, we do have a number of speaker cards, but I think we should let Mr. Nichols and his staff make a presentation to us first, and then we'll go through the members and then take questions from the public comments.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And with me, I'm Ron Nichols, General Manager of Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, and have Aaron Benjamin, who is our Senior Assistant General Manager for the power system, and Mike Webster, who has had the lead responsibility for pulling together our integrated resources plan. And this is mainly going to be a presentation on the integrated resources plan, or IRP by its acronym. I just wanted to take a few moments to address an issue that I think has probably had a bit of confusion, and that is the interrelationship between the integrated resource plan, the IRP, and the department's rate process going forward, because I know that there's been a bit of confusion on that. And as you'll see when we go through what Mr. Webster has here, that there's been a lot of effort in terms of public outreach and process associated with getting input into that IRP. That document is sort of a living process, the way the department is moving forward on it. It's a planning document. That document will be updated regularly, and it lays out a 10-year plan of not all, but a very big portion of the cost drivers that drive our total power costs, and as a result, our power rates. But I want to point out that it's not everything when we talk about what's in the IRP doesn't include everything and all the other costs that go into the power costs and the power rates. It sets out a framework, the IRP sets out a framework to evaluate and identify our major power resources, the electric transmission components associated with that. It goes over on into our energy efficiency and all different types of power supplies, both what we generally kind of refer to as conventional as well as renewable. But you're going to see in here a lot of discussion about projects and components and things of expenditures. But the thing I want to clarify is there's a big process that came in to getting to that and identification. You're going to see some recommendations in some of those major areas, but these are not intended to be some solid commitment to an individual project, nor a plan to set into rates a specific project. That's a subsequent effort, and that's why I'm trying to make that clarification before Mike gets into this. It's setting out a basic path to where we want to go after having gone through evaluation of a lot of different alternatives. And separately from this, and in fact, this was a major driver into kind of getting ourselves comfortable with what are the types of things that we should be considering as we look into our rate process, recognizing that generally rates are typically like a 1 year, and we'll be talking about potentially a multi-year rate process, certainly not a 10-year rate process or a rate commitment of any sort. So between now, literally, kind of effectively next week, a week from today, is kind of our formal, very kind of beginning kickoff of our consideration of a much longer term evaluation of our rates. And I want to give you just a little highlight in what is really kind of a week ahead, because I haven't had this conversation with our Board of Commissioners yet, to be honest with you. But in the interest of clarity, I wanted to at least get into it a bit. And that is, we're going to, between now, effectively, and August of this year, be going through a much more public process with respect to how we evaluate what goes into our rates. Our plan is to give out to our board and to this committee and the council, our customers and the business and environmental community, virtually any other stakeholders out there, a 3 to 5 year look at our rate projections. So we're not going to just look a little short lens of what's this next year. And the reason for that will be a little bit more obvious as we go through that. We're laying out a plan that will look at a range of specific set of cases of what we might be able to do in the way of commitments to projects, to programs, and levels of undertaking, some major pieces of which are in this integrated resource plan. And in March, just about about 3 weeks out now, we'll be coming out with a very specific set of what those plans will be, kind of bookends of what the rates will be, and kind of a medium case in between, and what are the different components of those rates as we look at that. And we'll take a look at what those different slices of what do we do with respect to our reliability program on the electric side. What are we doing with respect to our renewable plans? What's the cost effects of things like once through cooling, our solar and feed-in tariff items? What are these cost components, and how do these things compare to one another as we go forward? And trying to do that in a way that we can all get our arms around, that can come up with some policy decisions, and as a result, some rate levels that we can all live with and know what we're getting and what we're not getting at those various rate levels. The IRP that we're talking about today is a big piece of that range. And we're going to be doing this both water and electric, by the way. I'm just kind of talking from power side right now. But some of the things we're talking about are significant drivers associated with that, and you're going to see some 10-year numbers around some of that. We'll end up looking at some year-by-year slices of those costs when we get into the rate plan, just literally a couple weeks out. So the point of bringing all this up right now is that you're going to see a lot of programs and projects and dollars and timing around some of this. It isn't something that we have to be slavishly held to. It's not like we're laying out an IRP and saying, well, this is it, this is exactly what we're going to do. It's a process that said, this is the path we're going to go down, here's the big components, and here's recommendations about what we do on that over a 10-year period of time. Now within that, let's look at how we might vary the timing or vary the mixes of some of these things over the years to be able to get to a cost level that we're frankly willing to be able to tolerate for our customers and for our community. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mike to kind of get into the IRP itself.
All right, thank you. The IRP, there we go. The IRP started with 3 very, very important principles, and I just like to highlight those principles. This is what we were attempting to integrate as we developed this plan. The first is high reliability, the second is environmental stewardship, and third is competitive rates. So I kind of fashioned that as the 3 legs of the stool. We need all 3 pieces to make this particular plan work. Now, in the development of this plan, we held 7 regional workshops. I'd like to spend a little bit of time on that. Is that these workshops were spread throughout the city. They were in August and September. And then we did a final workshop as we rolled out the results of the comments, and we did that in November of 2010. And the purpose of these workshops was to get input on the plan and its recommendations. Now, the workshops were structured to have full participation and dialogue for those that took the time and invested it with us. So each workshop started with a general presentation, and then we followed up with breakout sessions. And the breakout sessions were professionally facilitated, and the purpose was to have dialogue. What we really wanted to do is not have one group capitalize all the comments, but allow everyone the opportunity to express their desires. And by having it professionally facilitated, we were able to do that. Then each group prioritized some of the results, came back to the larger group and shared those results. Now, we didn't just go out and talk to people. What we also tried to do is recognize that there's some people who just couldn't make the workshop. So we developed an interactive web page. And the web page was modeled after the workshop. So you could, from your home, watch the presentation so you had the same information. The same questions were asked on the web page, and it was interactive. We could compile comments so people could answer the questions, send in comments through this interactive web page. And so that was another outreach, and we got hundreds of comments off the webpage. And we didn't stop there. We also targeted business customers, some of the neighborhood councils, environmental groups, where we did a session with each of those stakeholder groups. Now, the results of that, the hundreds and hundreds of comments, they're all posted on the webpage. You can see every comment from every meeting. But we hired AECom. What they have is some very special software that goes through when they do environmental processes. And what they do is keyword searches, and they take all the comments and they start to identify key themes as they run this program. And so we turned all the comments over to them. They analyzed all the comments, and from that came the following themes. And I'm going to bring them all up here. And this is on your presentation on page 4, so if that's hard to read, you'll see it on page 4. And I'd like to spend a little bit of time here, because these themes are the result of all of those workshops and all of the analysis, and we think that these themes capture what we heard. So we heard, in the environmental category, we heard maximize energy efficiency, and that was very important to many of our stakeholders. And so what we've made sure we did in this integrated resource plan is that we achieved 10% energy efficiency by 2016. And we heard that demand response as a part of that, if we could do some things to get the demand off of those peak hours so we don't have to build power plants, that made a whole lot of sense. And so we have 500 megawatts of demand response program as part of our plan. We also heard don't build local facilities that impact disadvantaged communities. The concern was building something in an area that benefited all customers to the disadvantage of someone local. And in this plan, we are just looking at the technical requirements and locating facilities where it makes the most technical sense to support our grid. And we heard reducing greenhouse gas emissions was very important. In this plan, we reduced greenhouse gas emissions 55% below 1990 levels. Now, rates were very important as well, and we heard that it was important to only invest in projects that were required or reflected the interests of the community, such as renewable energy. We believe the IRP does just that. The concern was not to put a bunch of fluff in the IRP and padding it with a lot of projects that weren't really key and focused, and I think you're going to hear that in the recommendations today. We heard it was important to make sure that the costs were very clear and understandable. So we did a lot of work during the workshop process before we did our final rollout to include as much of the costs in the IRP as possible. And we think we've made it very clear on what those major investments are. And we heard avoid adverse rate impacts to vulnerable communities. And so we took that to heart, and we recognize that energy efficiency targeted to low-income communities can be very beneficial, because if rates do go up, their bill does not have to go up by targeting from a communication perspective, an enabling perspective, and actually investing in energy efficiency like our refrigerator program and our weatherization programs. We can target those communities directly. And we heard, especially from the business community, that predictable rates were important. They understood rate increases, but they have to know 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years out for their budget and their planning. It can't go up one year and down another year, so predictability was absolutely vital to the business community. Now, energy sources was also very important, and I think this was mirrored back based on our presentation to a certain degree, that the public seemed to understand that diversifying our resources really helped increase our reliability. And from several fronts. One is by using our transmission and spreading resources across our entire grid, if a transmission line goes down, there's enough in our grid that can continue to support the system. So to locate it across our grid. The other, for example, renewable energy. Instead of locating all the wind projects in one area where you might have wind one day and wind not the next day, is to diversify wind resources throughout the grid. Diversify solar resources throughout the grid so you take advantage of those weather patterns. And so we've done that in SIRP. We heard very clearly that DWP should eliminate coal from its generation portfolio, and we will. LADWP right now in this IRP is recommending selling our Navajo coal plant by 2015, 4 years early. And our board and management is committed to eliminating coal. And we heard that local solar was very, very important to the community. to offset transmission losses, to bolster our local distribution grid, and to create local jobs. And we are recommending a 40 to 50% of all of our solar be local. And lastly, and maybe even most importantly, the public agrees that reliability is important, and it was almost a given that the public expects us to maintain high reliability. So we will continue, and we recommend continuing to invest in our electrical grid to continue that high reliability. We also heard that smart grid was an important investment so that our customers can participate in shifting how they use energy and to help bolster our reliability. And the underlying theme of all of this is to continue to communicate. I think that we started out on the right track to really have a robust public process over the course of many, many months, but I think it's just a start, and in future IRPs, we just need to continue that robust dialogue. And so out of all of these themes, these are the recommendations. Now, these recommendations are based on the public input that we heard and required actions. And some of the recommendations, there's some flexibility on the pace and the timing of these recommendations. So as we walk our way through, I'm going to point out where we may have some flexibility on the pace and the timing. So over the next 10 years, we're recommending to invest $11 billion in reliability improvements. LADWP has an obligation to serve our customer, and it's very, very important that we continue to invest in our infrastructure. Some of our equipment is over 100 years old. Our pole replacement schedule before we started a power reliability program, when we weren't making investments, the poles were 106, some of the poles were 116 years old, and we're trying to get that age down to 60 years. Our cable replacement schedule was 1,200 years, and we're trying to get that cable replacement schedule down to 75 years. And we're doing a good job on transformers, is that we've gotten our transformer replacement down to 60 years. Now, but we have to continue that investment. And so in this 10-year cycle, we need to continue to replace 42,000 poles, 530 miles of underground cable, and 21,000 transformers. So making investments in our infrastructure is what keeps our system strong. And it's an important goal, but we understand there may be some pace and timing issues that we can discuss. The second investment is to modernize our power plants. And what this means is that we have some very, very old power plants at our Haynes and Scattergood generating station. One of our plants at Haynes, although we make a lot of investment to keep it reliable, it's older technology. This plant takes 3 days to start up. So if we're trying to keep the grid secure, we have to know what the load is 3 days from now. And since that's almost impossible to predict, we will start that generating station and let it run all summer long, creating emissions at night, on weekends, just so we know that we can keep the lights on. And so by modernizing that, by replacing this technology with quick start units, these are combustion turbines that can start up in 10 minutes, then we can keep our grid much more reliable. But one of the drivers, there's actually two drivers of this, is that the South Coast Air Quality Management Agreement requires us to repower these units. And they have a very definitive schedule in which we have to repower these units. And the other is the pending once-through cooling rule, which will require us to get off ocean water cooling by a certain date. So to a great degree, our hands are tied. We have to convert and repower this Haynes generating station and Scattergood generating station so that we can get off ocean water cooling and meet the AQMD, but it has the side benefit of it's going to be much more efficient, so we'll reduce fuel, we'll reduce air emissions, and we're also going to reduce our ocean water cooling. The next is to transition from Navajo early. SB 1368 requires that we exit all conventional coal-fired generation when those project agreements terminate. So for Navajo generating station, that is in 2019, and for IPP, that is in 2027. And so what we've done here is we've tried to figure out a way we could accelerate our Navajo generating station, and we can do this. So the investment is $350 million to remove Navajo from our portfolio, replace it with other types of generating resources, And it helps us because Navajo right now contributes 26% of our carbon emissions. So we think that this is an investment that's very responsive to the public who said they wanted us to get off coal-fired generation as early as possible. The next is invest in renewable energy, $7 billion to reach 33% by 2020. Now, LADWP believes this one is required. One, the California Air Resources Board has adopted what's called the Renewable Energy Standard, and that's in the process of going through inaction through the legal process to do that. Also, SB 23 has been reintroduced, and that is a legislative fix to a 33% renewable program. So DWP sees the writing on the wall. So this recommendation to invest $7 billion, the idea is to stabilize at 20%, and then in a very sustained and rational way, go from 20% to 33%. In this recommendation, timing gives us options. By having the time to layer in renewables over the course of a decade, we can use our transmission grid and our time to really negotiate it against developers and get the best price. If we get into a situation where we're backed up against a wall and we have a compliance deadline in just a few short years, they're going to know that, and we are not going to get the best prices. So we have a very sustained growth pattern from now until 2020. And this shows you what we've achieved. And the reason we are so proud of this chart is not so much that we hit 20%, although that's wonderful, is the growth, because once we established the goal in 2003, LADWP is the blue line at the bottom. So we were at 3% then, and then by establishing the goal and consistently moving forward, we went from 3% to 20% in 2010 in delivered electrons in our system. And so we're proud of that growth, and if we set the right goals, we will get there. Now, on page 10 in your handout and on the screen is expand local solar. This was a very important comment that we heard quite consistently through all the workshops. And so we're recommending to invest $1.2 billion, and of the solar that fits in with our integrated resource plan, to do 40 to 50% in local solar. Now, number one, we have 3 programs that can get us there. The first program is our solar incentive program, which has been running for several years and will continue to run. The second is to build solar on city properties. So, for example, we have a wind farm at our Pine Tree Wind Farm out in Mojave, and we can locate a 10 megawatt, and here's actually a picture of it. We can locate 10 megawatts right underneath the wind turbines out there. So we're using a site that's already there for another resource and repurposing it for solar. We can do the same thing at our Adelanto switching station, which is the DC converter station. And there's a 10 megawatt potential there, and we have some very, very large tanks and things like that. And the third leg of this is our feed-in tariff program, which we're just embarking on developing. And the feed-in tariff program, one, it is required that we offer a feed-in tariff program by state laws, SB 32, but also from a local standpoint, it is the right thing to do to balance all of our solar program. And then invest in energy conservation. AB 2021 requires us to set a goal for energy conservation. We've done that. And so we have a plan here to get to 10% energy efficiency by 2016. Now, we've already achieved 3%, but it will we need a continued sustained investment in order to get there. And energy efficiency makes a lot of sense because we permanently remove the load from our system when we don't have to build power plants to support that. And this will avoid building about 700 megawatts of new generation transmission and distribution facilities, and it will also help support our local grid. And lastly, to invest in smart grid technology, and this is a $1 billion investment. And smart grid technology, to us, there's a couple things it means, but to us very specifically, it means targeted investments so that we can, one, improve the efficiency of our own system. LADWP is the biggest user of energy of anyone in the system, and that's because of how we use energy. We can think of it this way. If you have a road with traffic lights, and every traffic light you hit a red light and you have to stop, You burn more fuel, create more emissions, and the next red traffic light and the next red traffic light. Well, our system was built with technology that has all of these traffic lights. But if we invest with smart grid and we can target our system so that we can create all green lights, that electron is going to flow a lot smoother and we're going to have much less losses. And if we reduce our losses, it's going to be a significant improvement on the system. We can also use smart grid technology to help us with demand response programs, because if we invest here, it helps us get some of that 500 megawatts and gets that off our peak hours. And third, by investing in smart grid, our customers can participate because they get the right price signal so they can use energy much more wisely in the future. And so I think I'd like to make 2 points, is that as you add all these up, it's a $22 billion investment, and our routine infrastructure, what would be normally be doing, is about $23 billion for a $45 billion investment over the next 10 years. But the recommendations are to have a steady and sustained progress on all these initiatives, and that's what's going to get us the lowest cost overall. And number 2 is all of these recommendations are integrated. If we don't do smart grid technology, we're not going to get as much energy efficiency. If we don't do energy efficiency, we may need to build more power plants. Is all the recommendations, while there may be some of the recommendations have wiggle room as far as pace and timing, they are integrated so that if we change the pace of one, we may need to change the pace of another one. And those are the types of things we'll be looking at as we come forward with a more definitive rate restructuring and rate package. And so in close, I just want to point out that we're making investments, but we're making investments to make Los Angeles a better environment, more reliable, and first, invest in reliability by replacing aging infrastructure and modernizing plants. It helps us integrate renewables in a more flexible manner. It helps us reduce ocean water cooling by 56%, supports the environment by reducing pollution through clean renewable technologies and modernizing our plants, and it reduces greenhouse gas emissions 38% more than where we are today. And it hedges our volatile fuel, because by investing in fixed fuel cost renewables, it does provide a financial hedge. And we're going to help our customers reduce energy usage and shift their demand so that we use energy more wisely. And we believe we can do all of this and maintain our competitive rate advantage while creating jobs in Los Angeles.
Thank you. Is that complete, your complete presentation? Mr. Krikorian has joined us, for the record. If the other members would allow me, I thought what I might do is quickly ask the 4 members of the public who wanted to come and comment on the IRP to come on up and make their comments. If you could slide a chair over for them. And then we'll get into the questions from the members. Dr. Williams, you're our first person. Then Jenny Binstock. And then Christina Scarborough, Wes Hamid, or I think it's Weiss Hamid, and Jack Humperville. So Dr. Williams, if you would go first. Thank you.
Dr. Clyde Williams for 115 Barrett Road, El Sereno, Northeast LA. It's a great plan, except for one thing. Where's the strategic plan for the entire corporation? Where I first saw one about 2 or 3 years ago, and it was being revised, and then people said, well, we don't want to put it on to the next general manager, and then we had another general manager, and another general manager, and finally we have a general manager that may stay for more than 3 months. But strategic plans are not based upon the general manager. The strategic plans are from the board, the policy makers, yourselves. So I don't understand why we go ahead with 2 major plans when we don't know where the corporation is going. What is its relation? The whole situation with Prop 26 and what is a fee and what is a tax? Cross subsidies. I know something about those. So it's a question as to how do we know that this is the way to go if we don't know which way we're going? So that's my basic one. The central issue is feed-in tariffs. Well, how about the geothermal? Geothermal is about the only real base load you can get, and that's Imperial Valley or someplace else. I do not believe that the current plan, might say, documents enough on the reliability of the geothermal and its environmental effects, and I had experience with the geysers. So it's a nice plant, but what is it based on? Thank you.
Thanks, Doctor. Jenny Binstock?
Hi, thank you for having me. My name is Jenny Binstock. I work for Greenpeace USA as a regional organizer here in Southern California. And we really appreciate, we've just recently engaged in this whole process with the Integrated Resource Plan in the last few months as we've kicked off a national effort to transition off of coal-fired power. And we really appreciate that the early transition is made off of the Navajo generating station, but we're very concerned that we are not making an earlier commitment to end our reliance on coal-fired power altogether by 2020. And our role, we recognize, you know, from the organizing perspective is working with the public and educating members of the community and working with community organizations about how we can do this. And in the last few months, we've helped turn out a couple of thousand people to an event highlighting the impacts of coal last fall with other partner organizations. We're communicating on a regular basis to our tens of thousands of members throughout the city about how important this is for Los Angeles to lead on this issue and to gain new opportunities for the local community through investments in bolder efficiency programs. And we look forward to working with City Council and with the DWP on creating a plan that'll get us off of coal earlier than this plan outlines, and we want to be a part of that process and support it through our outreach efforts.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Christina Scarborough. After Christina is Weiss Hamid. You can sit there.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Christina Scarborough. I work for the Sierra Club, and I live in the Valley, so I'm a resident as well. I appreciate the Council's interest this afternoon in hearing the IRP. We have been engaged in this process for the last year at least, and with you as well. And so we've seen the excellent work from the staff at the DWP dedicated to listening to the public. And as they mentioned, the public did prioritize how we will get off of coal, you know, as soon as possible. It was on that list of environmental priorities, number 2, and it was very important. Over the last year, we've gathered 8,000 petitions from community members, volunteers, members of your community have gone out and gathered petitions at their farmers markets, at their churches. We had over 1,000 individuals submit comments on the IRP. We had hundreds of people attend the public meetings, not just from the Sierra Club, but from community groups that we reached out to and told about this information and invited to participate in the process. We really appreciate the dedication to getting out of Navajo early. It is one of the dirtiest and deadliest plants in the country. And we see that this is a great start, but it doesn't act with the urgency needed to address climate change and public health issues. The Intermountain Power Plant emits 842 pounds of mercury every year, when an eighth of a teaspoon will poison a whole lake. So it's really important that we make a commitment to energy efficiency, to get out of coal, and a strong commitment to energy efficiency will actually protect ratepayers from the rising costs of not only coal, but any investments that we make. Those energy efficiency measures will create local jobs and protect those ratepayers. And in addition, we've actually had 10 neighborhood councils pass motions in support of this: Atwater Village, Greater Echo Park Elysian, Greater Griffith Park Neighborhood Council, Lake Balboa, Mar Vista Community Council, Palms, Silver Lake, South Robertson, Toluca Lake, and Venice.
Thank you very much. If
Thank
you want to
you.
leave something with the CLA or the clerk, you can take it over there. Mr. Hamid?
Hi, my name is Weiss Hamid, and I'm a recent UCLA graduate. I first want to thank the Department of Water and Power for committing to get LA off of coal power from the Navajo plant before 2020. However, I feel like the integrated resource plan can make more of an effort committing to end all coal power use, including the Intermountain Power Plant in Utah, before that 2020 deadline. Coal is one of the leading causes of asthma attacks in the U.S. Growing up in LA, I've witnessed a lot of my close friends suffer through asthma attacks, asthma problems throughout their lives. So I've seen the effects that it has on people. It is careless for our city to support an industry that causes this damage to people, even if those people might not be in our site, whether they be in Utah or in Arizona. This, I feel, is inexcusable. We have a responsibility to provide not only our people, but all people with the safest environment possible. And this cannot be done while we power our city with such a dirty energy source. I have spent a significant amount of time reaching out to the local community and have yet to meet one person who was not both shocked and disappointed that coal is still used to power our city. There is economic opportunities out there for green jobs, and if leadership here in LA prioritizes shifting towards greener technology, we could benefit both environmentally and economically. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Jack Humphreysville?
My name is Jack Humphreyville. I'm with the Greater Wilshire Neighborhood Council. I thought that the IRP presentations were very good over the last several months. However, the one thing they did lack was any specific information with regards to rates. Quite frankly, it was very confusing. I would have endorsed a 25% rate increase if that was going to be the extent of the rate increase over a 10-year period. So we go from 12 cents to 15 cents. That's just fine with me. But then I told that it's not that way. So we need to get a much better feel for what the impact is going to be on the ratepayers. The ratepayers are not an organized lobbyist group like a lot of other people that have been speaking today. We're just a bunch of slobs out there paying bills, going to work every day, just trying to make ends meet. So I think before we come to any decisions, we need to get a much better understanding as to what the impact is going to be on the rates. Thank you.
Thanks, Jack. And that concludes our speaker cards. I'm going to throw out a couple of issues that I just wanted to put on the table and then ask my colleagues to speak also. And we're not going to get this done in a day. So, people need to just put their issues out there, and then we're going to come back to this again in 45 days for additional discussion and review. A couple of things I'd like to know. In the past we've had some energy efficiency programs, and I think in your comments you actually referenced the refrigerator program, but you emphasized education and outreach, and then there have been some incentives through the department for people to become much more energy efficient. But I've never been able to get a handle on how successful they have been, or how well they've worked, or how many people they have touched, and I've never really been able to get an answer to that kind of a question beyond some anecdotal information. The other issue that I want to highlight for you is the infrastructure issue. And I don't need to go over past administrations at the department, but the numbers that you shared with us today are not astonishing, but they almost seem overwhelming or possibly insurmountable in terms of rebuilding our infrastructure. And I want to know how you prioritize within each category what progress we have made, and how you see, in terms of your prioritization, we can make progress in the various categories that you spoke about. Your just quick first blush on the feed-in tariff. Then my last point is on building solar on city property. We had a horrible experience with Measure B. It was a disaster. And it was a disaster from the beginning to the end. And there were so many competing interests in that. And I would say a lack of intellectual honesty on so many levels, that it was really disappointing because it lost sight of our objective. So I wonder, and you weren't here for that, but your colleagues may have some memory. I wonder if you could give us a comment on how we could possibly do projects on city land, deal with the competing interests in the context of developing solar projects on city land. And I confine my comments to city land at this point because it's land we've already acquired, land that's under our control in our portfolio, and that just eliminates one major chunk of a possible conflict. But I don't know how else to say this. I'll just say it. I was just so appalled and disgusted by how that played out that I'd just like to hear a little bit about how you think we might be able to do something that it would be successful within our own control, within our own portfolio, because I don't think we could withstand another Measure B failure like that again and, live to tell about it. I think we will lose all confidence from the public. So those are just, starting points. Sorry, but I just want to put those things out there.
Good points.
Yeah.
With regard to the kind of where we are and what we've seen with respect to our energy efficiency, if I can put Lorraine on the spot, because I have to say, being somewhat the new kid on the block with regard to what we've achieved, I would leave that to Lorraine to speak.
Okay.
Lorraine.
Yeah, and I don't mean to put you on the spot.
No,
but
that's fine.
I want to put it out there.
That's why we brought a contingent,
yeah,
so
no,
we
I
can try to address your issue. And Lorraine Pasquette is our senior assistant general manager responsible for our sustainability programs and a number of other items of importance.
Right.
And I would like to come back to you with more specifics. I have been in touch with your staff, and we're a little behind on getting some of the specifics. The energy efficiency budget, as you know, is funded through the ECAF. And I know I'm not supposed to say that word anymore, but it is still factually correct that it is funded through the ECAF, and it is one of the programs that suffered a reduction last year while we were going through the undercollection and reviewing some of the potential push points. And so I would say that the 2010 and 2009-10 year was not one of our best years because of the budget constraints. But one of the questions you asked, which is a very important question, is about the programs, and we could look at the last 5 years, we can look at the current year, and then looking forward on how successful each program has been, including the refrigerator switch-out program, which we extended for another 3 years. We can look at how many people we've touched, both large customers and small customers, low-income customers, and we can look at the merits of the program. We're getting ready to wrap up a potential study that we've been working on since last year. We're pretty excited about that. We actually added demand response to it to expand the scope, so Mr. Benjamin's staff can look at that as a potential new program coming up that can be woven into the smart grid. But we're also looking at some new programs in the area of outreach, and we have the benefit of the AIR grants that I know some of your officers are working with us on to push regardless of the budget constraints. And we'd like to come back to you with a full presentation on, notwithstanding last year, which was a bit of an aberration, but looking at a full report for you, looking at the potential study, and looking at some more granularity into the IRP for the EE programs.
And then, thank you. I would appreciate you doing that because, I never had any way to measure whether they were working or not. They were all great ideas, but I don't know how much of a deployment there was out there amongst the ratepayers and users and residential, and so. And then my next point was on infrastructure. How do you prioritize within category? And while the odds for dealing with what we have before us seem to be insurmountable, what's your thought or strategy on addressing that?
So if I may, Madam Chair, Aaron Benjamin, Senior Assistant General Manager in Sheriff Power. The infrastructure that we have, the generation, the transmission, and the distribution, the three major units that we have an inspection program and a predictive maintenance program that we have put in place several years ago that will go through each of the assets that we have. We have an active infrareding program, inspection infrareding program. We have some destructive testing that we do on materials that make up our system to find out, the impacts of age, service, and also the criticality of the assets. So, for example, the transformer replacement program that we have a group of technical employees that will take these inputs on the age, the performance, and also the location of those transformers and come up with a priority for the crews to go out and change those assets that are in need of replacement without having a major outage caused by those assets being failed, especially during the heat waves and severe weather conditions. So these programs are in place. They try to prioritize the criticality of failures and the consequences of failure. So we have the Energy Control Center basically saying if you have this piece of equipment fail, it's going to make a larger impact on the system than the others. So we have to give it a priority in order for us to make sure we have spare parts and then we have the
But you're always
the
in
design.
triage mode.
We are.
When you're in
We-
that kind of a
And we
prioritization.
won't be out of this triage mode until we have a sustainable, regular, preventive maintenance program rather than the reactive. So if you have a
That
normal,
goes to another issue, though, because until you get a sustainable, proactive, preventative program, which would probably, and I'm just guessing, because I don't know for sure, but would probably necessitate some kind of a rate adjustment so that you could get, at least, if I'm following your logic, see, that's where we need to open it up and put it on the record and discuss why that is the case. Do you know what I mean? Because
it is the $11 billion that we're recommending. So it is a catch-up to make sure we bring the backlog back to normal and also looking forward to have a sustainable program
But
moving
and
ahead.
that's when we get into that mode where we feel like the tail's wagging the dog again. Do you know what I mean? The logic is so circular that, because when we talk about years past, and what we've been able to accomplish years past, given where we were budget-wise, and we're playing catch-up too, because we've never been able to get definitive answers on where we were in the restoration, rehabilitation, or renovation of the infrastructure, and why we were lagging behind in all categories. So we have no benchmark from which to start or from which to measure. But again, it sort of all flows into, we're going to end up having another rate increase debate. I don't know if I'm wrong. I could be wrong. I think I'm right.
I mean, as far as, those statistics in the past, as far as the age, the assets and all those things, those are all factual.
I'm just looking
Yeah.
back just a couple of administrations. I'm not even looking back like 116 years. I'm just looking back maybe 3 to 5.
But
That's all. I
But-
mean, I'd be okay with that.
I can tell you, Madam Chair, that looking forward as far as just purely physics and the way we run the grid, having failures happen due
No, I
to,
agree with you on the failure part.
Yeah.
I think I'm looking at the money side.
Yeah.
That's all. But I'll come back to that. And then, I don't know if you had a chance, Mr. Nichols, on the feed and tariff conversations that have been going on over the last 3 years, and, LABC, and they're driving ahead on a very vigorous campaign to get the city to develop a program. And I don't know if you've even had an in-depth opportunity to analyze and review their work, and if you have a direction or even a conversation within the department that you think you might want to take.
Well, we've definitely had conversations in the department with the LABC, and there's work going on ourselves looking at a feed-in tariff. The issue that we're working through right now, you saw in the plan, the IRP, that looking at the plan of having somewhere between 300, 360 megawatts of in-basin solar, we're working through what portion of that might be appropriately done under a feed-in tariff program, where we would set a price or a target price for what we'd be willing to pay, and then see if the parties would come forward and install those on their commercial buildings or their residential roofs. We're going through that plan right now. We're looking at our alternatives. We're looking at other feed-in tariff programs, both the ones that have worked okay and the ones that have not, because there are experiences on both ends of that. And our plans are to come up with a phased-in plan, multi-year plan, to go forward and develop a feed-in tariff and start at a level that kind of gets our feet on the ground with that, gets our customers used to dealing with that, and you'll see a rollout of a plan on that coming out later this year, with an objective of having an adopted initial feed-in tariff plan in this calendar year. I can't say right now exactly the size on that. In fact, one of the things that you will see, and one of the reasons we're trying to push forward to get our arms around what we think the relative cost of that's going to be, is so that as we look forward, going back to this identification of a kind of range of rate adjustments that we're looking at, say that is one of the components that would be in there. How much of a feed-in tariff do we feel that we could or should justify putting in those different years, say the next 3-year period of time, and what is the rate effect that we expect to see on that? So you'll see numbers on it, you'll see some ranges with respect to that, and then ultimately later on this year we'll be coming up with a proposed initial plan and the structure of that plan in terms of how we plan to procure that.
And then I don't know if you've had the opportunity or if you've been briefed on what happened with Solar Measure B.
I'm generally enough familiar with the problems associated with that, yes.
Yeah, and then what you think we can do on a going forward basis to try to do something maybe on city-owned property that could be successful and we could advance that agenda.
Well, we're starting with and I might turn it over to Lorraine to add any additional details if they're available. But we're starting with as indicated here, some of our putting at our own land, our own facilities within the department, and moving forward on some of those plans. We are in the process of looking at how do we go about doing things on other city property, other city buildings. I don't think we're at a point right now where we have anything specifically enough melded that we have a specific recommendation on that, but it's in the mix on that. I don't know, Lorraine, whether you can add any more to that or not.
Is that okay? One of the first topics that we just, and I'm sorry I wasn't here either for Measure B.
Sorry. You're better off.
Sorry about that.
Shouldn't be sorry. You should be happy.
Well, 'cause I don't have a full appreciation maybe for some of the questions. What we have discussed more recently as far as a comprehensive solar plan for LADWP and for the City of Los Angeles with Mr. Benjamin's staff, with some stakeholders, with some of the external to LA experience. And when I say that, I mean a lot of the feed and tariff programs, a lot of local solar, a lot of the public-private partnerships, and I don't know if I'm using vernacular that fits with what occurred in Measure B, but there are some models that have been used in the Edison service territory. There are some models that have been vetted by the California Public Utilities Commission over 2 and 3 years. And there are ways to invest in local solar in a cost-effective manner with public-private partnerships that have worked more recently and then have been tried by some of our colleagues at Edison. They've been tried, maybe not as successfully as some of our colleagues at San Diego Gas and Electric Company. They haven't quite done it at PG&E yet, but we know that it can be done. We can learn from their lessons, and we've spent some time studying what they've done. In fact, a couple weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago, we spent some time on the phone with the head of the Energy Division who led a 2-year proceeding to look at hitting the clearing price for solar just right and working with public entities and private entities. So I think because there's a lot out there that we can look at and then bring home to LA and marry with the structures that we work within. We have our workforce, we have city property, we have private companies who have done a lot of learning in this area. I think in 2011, we can pull it all together and come up with a comprehensive solar, and the timings couldn't be better because international solar prices are as low as they've ever been because the industry's grown, they've gotten to scale, and there's some excess in Europe. And so I think this year is probably one of the best years to come in and do work not only on city property, but also on private property with our major customers as an added customer benefit in addition to energy efficiency, and then large-scale solar, because that's where you really see the cost efficiency. And I'll give you some public information that's hard to get but easy for me to say. We worked on a project before I came back to the department on a large solar plant, which is 21 megawatts. And Mr. Krikorian heard a little bit about this a few years ago, and it was successful. And it was around 10 cents. And
Where's
so,
Blythe?
Blythe. And so we know that it was done with a combination of some union forces and some other folks who came in from the area, not LA union forces, but others. So we know it can be done, and we know that there are models out there. And we also know that the department, outside of solar, can come together and execute very well, just like we did on the upgrade on the STS transmission line recently. So it's a great year to take a serious, fresh look at solar pricing, and the art of what's possible, and learn from our neighbors in the region.
Okay. Mr. Corey, do you want to say something, and I'll go to Mr. Koretz and come to you?
If you're finished.
Yeah, I'm done. Yeah.
Just a couple of things for now, and I appreciate your saying this is a continuing dialogue, because I know this is going to take a while. Let's start on efficiency for a moment, because, Ron, you've been focusing a lot on the importance of efficiency, and I really appreciate that. The good news is, on the water side, the department has done a terrific job, and that water efficiency is one of the great public policy successes I think we've had here and statewide, but the department in particular. Energy, not so much so, and the department has been criticized in some quarters for sort of staying around the statutory minimum instead of trying to be more aggressive about a comprehensive efficiency strategy. And I am glad that that's an emphasis in the IRP, and I'm glad that it's been an emphasis of what you've talked about. Can you talk about some of the major initiatives that have been particularly successful, some that maybe might have had promise but were disregarded as unfeasible before, but in this environment with a greater need for efficiency and greater strain on our infrastructure and so on, are becoming feasible now for consideration? Can you give us some guidance about, big ticket vision for how we do, how we make a quantum leap in efficiency?
I'm going to just make one general comment, and then I'll leave it over to Lorraine on it. For starters, she mentioned earlier this potential study, and for those who don't speak energy efficiency, a potential study is where you go look at a service territory or a region and say, given what's here right now, given our uses, given our mix of customer types, our ambient temperatures, what our housing stock is, what our building stock is, and such, and given what's out there available, proven or anticipated to be to be technically viable, evaluated elsewhere. What can we do? What can be done? And it's typically a stack. It's like what's the lowest hanging fruit first, and laying that out. That study is we have a draft of that right now that's looking very broadly, and to kind of refresh what the department has done, because that is a constantly moving target. We learn more from what other utilities have done. We learn more from what we've done in our own service territory, and new technologies and new opportunities become available all the time. So that's kind of a big refresh. I don't know that we're at a point right now where we're able to discuss what are the big ticket items out of that, but I want to make sure you're aware that that's always a really important big step when you're embarking upon a new multi-year program effort. And so we've done that. That work is almost behind us now to move forward, and we can build upon that as we start going through prioritizing what we're going to do in our programs. And so in terms of going into more detail about what our explicit experience would mean, I would punt the ball over to Lorraine a bit, who I think could speak to somewhat more, obviously, than I could on our specific experience historically.
So I'll give you examples of where we've seen program success in previous years. And I'd like to claim credit for it, but I wasn't here for that. Like, I claim credit anyway. In 2008-9, we had a peak year, and we saved approximately 1% of load. So we saved 318 gigawatt hours, and that's significant.
That's the statutory minimum, isn't it, for every year?
It is, but it's significant for the department as far as historical savings go, and it's under AB 2021. It is the goal that's set. We dipped after that, but the drivers for that were a small business direct install program and some of the residential lighting offerings that we had. And there was quite a bit of participation in this small business direct install. If you see the two big program drivers for residential, non-residential, that is what drove it. If one of the areas that we have begun discussing especially with the non-residential, is looking at those small businesses, looking beyond lighting, and what we can do with those customers outside of just the lighting switch out. We also have some opportunities that have come our way because of the grants, and we're looking at some building retrofits, the retro commissioning grant, because we received federal money, some AIR grant money, and we can pursue this type of work using a combination of our internal forces and potentially some contract work. This could be an area of growth, and we can test it through the grant money. The refrigerator, and I mentioned it earlier, the refrigerator turn-in program was expanded. It is something that was successful for us. It targets low income, and it's something that we should continue to do. We increased our rebates. We have a rebate menu for our residential and non-residential. Also, because of an AIR grant, we have some more money coming in, and we've added, in October, I believe October 1st of last year, we added some rebates to the menu of rebates. We won't see and be able to measure the success of that for at least a calendar year. I do also want to take a step back, because you stated that we've seen some success in the water conservation area, and I agree. We're very proud of the numbers. A big reason for that is, and our board just asked us this a couple of weeks ago, is because of some of the ordinance changes that this council passed and supported, and because of an increased and focused outreach effort by the department. And I think that's an area where we're gapping on the energy efficiency side. I'd like to see us be more aggressive with the codes, the building standards, and working in those areas. And I'd like to focus our team in this coming year in that area. And I'd also like to see us, frankly, do a lot more and a lot better job of outreach to match what we've done on the water side with energy efficiency and working with our customers in a very large and public way, especially through the council offices, but also a very focused way. We can take our top 100 list of customers and work with them on a very personal basis to look at their energy consumption, look at their facilities, and really change the way they behave and go through an educational process, and maybe even expand what we call our custom program to see if there are investments the department can make to help, and maybe they can match those investments to help them reduce their energy consumption permanently or on a semi-permanent basis, maybe for 10 years or 15. So I agree with you. I think that we can add new programs, different programs. We can look at what we do with water conservation as a template and apply it to energy efficiency and do a much better job.
And I think in particular in the commercial sector, and I'm wondering if combined heat and power, for example, has a role in what the department envisions for encouraging more efficiency in the commercial sector.
We are partnering with some developments, council member, on making sure those are integrated into the design, the combined heat and the efficiency measures and the cogen if possible. So we're partnering with some of these development agencies to make sure those standards are implemented, and we're part of the solution. And one thing, if I can add, Mike mentioned the system, the LADWP system, and the losses that we have. And that's a huge part of efficiency as far as making sure that our system is fine-tuned, where energy generated is delivered to the consumer with the least amount of losses that we could incur. So the system was built back in the 20s and the 30s. We still have equipment that are in operations that are 1930 vintage that kind of support the voltage in different areas of the city as the growth has happened. And that's part of the IRP, is for us to replace those equipment to make sure that we minimize those losses. And those are in millions of dollars of savings that we could have, if we can achieve that.
And
there are two other program areas that they're not directly related to the traditional energy efficiency program, but it's something that we've been developing in the last few months. And one of them is a sustainability partnership program. It was a contract, a non-binding contract that our customer service director developed for major customers and asked them to enter into an agreement with us to pursue a number of sustainability strategies: solar, energy efficiency, water conservation. We've taken that contract. We have scheduled an outreach to these customers. That's actually a workshop coming up next week, and we're looking at ways to work with these major customers to pursue additional energy efficiency and also do some sort of branding for them so they can stand up and say, we're a partner with the City of LA. We are investing X more in addition to what we have been to pursue energy efficiency savings in this calendar year, and have it as more of a high-profile, aggressive, LA-based major customer, proud to be a Green Customer LA program. The other piece that we looked at last year that we put on hold last year was a tough year, just all around. But we have under our program, the sustainability programs, the Green Tariff, and I think it's a real opportunity for us to take a step back and look at the green rate. It's a voluntary rate. I think it's a little too restrictive. If you're a customer and you want to, kind of like on your tax return, if you want to check a box and say, I'd like to add $1 a month or $5 more a month to help fund some of these additional green programs, it's not completely in line with what some of the water conservation, but if we already have a green tariff in place and we can expand on that for any customer, residential or business, and they want to jump into a program to support local sustainability investments, then we should make it a little bit easier for them to do that. So it's a project that we've been trying to flesh out and bring to our board and to the City Council to expand on the energy efficiency and the larger sustainability investments.
And if I could interject, you asked a couple of very good questions on energy efficiency and the power reliability program, is that we have some detailed reports in the IRP that has been in the public, and a lot of people have reviewed that in Appendix B as well as Appendix E. So much of what's being discussed today has been rolled out into the public with some data on history, where we're going in the future.
Okay. Now, change gears a bit to the solar area. One of your biggest customers in the city is LAUSD. This is a user of electricity that is almost entirely a peak demand customer. And it happens to be the customer that probably has the greatest number of flat roofs in Los Angeles. So can you talk a little bit about how the department can better partner with the district in order to encourage greater use of those rooftops for in-basin solar that matches the demand curve of the schools themselves, and potentially produces additional renewables that can be used, whether through a feed-in tariff or otherwise, by the system?
It's a couple of areas, Council Member, that we've been in discussions with LAUSD. The solar is one area, you know, where we have the incentive programs, and we have the also the requirement for them to have a demand response, you know, for us to use that. And also we've talked to them about the electric vehicle program, where they have the buses that can be used during, you know, go on the route in the morning, electric buses, come back to the campuses, have some charging stations, and then charge till the afternoon, and then make the round again. So there's a lot of potential for us, you know, partnering in these different programs, and we have a team that meets on a regular basis to see where those opportunities are and where we can collaborate with each other so we can make this work with it. But the solar is a big one, the demand response is another one, and then the electric charging station for the buses was an area also we talked about, and the rates also, combining all these three.
Mr. Corritz?
Yeah, probably my highest priority in this is trying to see us move forward with greater energy efficiency, as has already been touched on. I know you're looking at ideas that might have been discarded in the past. It wasn't clear to me, are you looking at all the best practices across the country and internationally and looking for ideas that may not be in the current discussion? Have we done that kind of research to look at every possible approach to this?
What's that, energy efficiency?
Yes.
So the answer is that the potential study looks at the potential for LA, and we're asking them as a supplemental. I really want to finish that out because it is a statutory requirement, and we're late. And I want to get it done for planning purposes, and for I want to release it for public review. But I do want them to go back and do more of a comparative analysis. But I didn't want to hold up the study. We have to do that. I also want them to look at, and we've talked about this preliminarily, some of the best practices, but I think it would benefit the city, and I think it would benefit the department if we hosted a technology forum, and if we invited on an international basis those who are developing new technologies all over the world on energy savings and some of the more disruptive technologies for building designs. For example, they have shades that cover your windows that are photovoltaic, but they're also insulating. And there are so many things that we can be doing to create that kind of forum to share the information so that the department can look at the technology that's out there. Everybody wants to come to LA. We should be doing this. The first part of it is the Sustainability Partners Workshop to connect with the customers and say, what do you want right now? The second part of it is technology learning. We had internally the staff looked at that last year just on a national basis and what other major utilities are doing and shared it with the head of our energy efficiency program, Mr. Gackstetter, but we need to do it in a more formal way. So the chunks are finish the potential study. The demand response program was added to that, which caused a slight delay, add a comparative analysis to other utilities and best practices, and on a parallel path, add the technology discovery process.
Okay, well, that all sounds pretty good, actually, so I'm somewhat encouraged. The thing I'm not as encouraged by is the level of priority we've given this. We're trying to shoot for 10% savings. I think it goes without saying, but I'll say it again. Obviously, anything you save through energy efficiency, you don't cause environmental problems, you have the cheapest possible way to solve this problem. So every dollar we can spend that results in energy efficiency is a dollar better spent than anywhere else on your budget in terms of trying to generate more energy. So I would say, from my point of view, the goal is too low, and the funding is too low. And personally, I would spend every dollar you can on energy efficiency until you reach the point of diminishing returns. I'd rather see us shoot for 15 or 20%. And if it had to be $2 billion, $2.5 billion instead, if we have the ability to do it, the question is, are there enough best practices and enough good things we can do that there are ways to spend the money effectively and actually do it? If there are, then I think that's where the priority should be. And at the same time, a lot of this is work intensive, so I would assume it would create a lot of local jobs. It winds up being a win-win-win-win in every possible way. So just my thought at this point.
If I might add, Council Member, I think we when we were briefing you, we mentioned it, but I think the DOE funding that we've had, one of the major component of it is the consumer behavior and the education portion of it, because that is a piece that it's extremely important. There was a survey done, I'm sure you've heard about it, the consumer decision making on buying flat screen TVs. 0% of consumers had any consideration given to consumption of those flat screen TVs. Zero. So that tells you that the consumers or the education portion, there's a lot of room for improvement in there. So the funding that we're using with UCLA, USC, and the JPL and the department, the partnering that we're doing on the consumer behavior and the information that's needed for the consumers to make the decisions and change their behavior to have efficiency part of their daily living is a major component also. I think Lorraine mentioned it a little, but I just wanted to highlight that program for you.
And a lot of it is, as you said, a consumer marketing issue. Some of it is also physical changes. The city has, I don't know, what do we have, 800 some odd significant energy inefficient buildings. And I know the city has a program which I think is mostly funded, if I recall, through the general fund, which means, especially now, it would be done as slowly as he possibly could do it, without a whole lot of help from the DWP. Is there any reason why that wouldn't be a high DWP priority and something we could fund much more significantly through the DWP and get those buildings all fixed up within the next 10 years so they're not costing the kinds of massive energy inefficiencies that they are currently?
I think that's part of the plan. As the same thing on the power side, our city buildings should be at the forefront of making sure these programs are all implemented in there.
Yeah.
Mr. Gaxeter's here, he actually has a little bit more color on that. On the city. Here, go ahead, sit down.
Good afternoon. I'm Tom Gaxeter, the Director of Energy Efficiency and Water Conservation at DWP. With regard to the city and the city's buildings, DWP actually undertook a large-scale audit of 497 city buildings and developed a plan by which the energy efficiency in those buildings could be improved. That information was given over in a very thick report to GSD, and we now work in partnership with GSD to get those projects undertaken. We support those projects by way of low-interest energy efficiency loans made to the city, and then we help pay back those loans through energy efficiency rebates as those measures actually get installed. So that's one good example of what we're doing for municipal buildings here in Los Angeles. We've also reached out to several other city departments as well. Bureau of Street Lighting is an example in the conversion of the street lights to LED street lights. We funded that with a very large energy efficiency loan, and we're now paying that loan back by virtue of the energy efficiency rebates. Similarly, with the Department of Transportation, the conversion of the traffic signals to LED traffic lights, we're making that same investment, both by virtue of the loan, which has already been paid off by the city, by the way, and now we're repaying the city by virtue of the rebates that are being paid as well.
Now, we discussed this issue somewhat in passing in the Audits Committee, and I know it's primarily a legal issue, although I don't completely understand it, and I'm not convinced that we couldn't get around it. But why do we only do low-interest loans and moving money around? Why doesn't the DWP actually directly pay for a good portion of the fixing up of these buildings and making them more energy efficient?
I can't speak to the legality of that question. I can tell you that the incentives that we pay for a good majority of the cost of those projects. So not in every case can we pay the entire cost, and actually in few cases can we pay the entire cost, but the incentives do pay for a good portion of them. And again, I can't speak to the legality of it.
If the issue isn't only legal, is there some reason why we can't put all those city buildings into this IRP and get them done as part of the energy efficiency project?
I would imagine one of the considerations would just be the funding that would take and where that funding would come from.
A lot of savings as a result, so I would think that should be included as part of this, and again, I'd encourage higher funding for that portion of this part of your budget. The other thing, a personal priority, but it's certainly not limited to me. I know there are probably millions of Angelenos that would agree with this, and it's already been mentioned. Getting us off coal. We're still talking about being on coal as late as 2027. Are there ways to do it quicker? I know we've made a good move with the Navajo plant. What can we do to get ourselves entirely off coal at an earlier date?
Well, we moved first on the Navajo plant by virtue of our ownership position and rights to that plant, and the rights to be able to literally divest that asset. Under the other, obviously larger coal plant is the Intermountain Power Plant, and we don't own that plant. We're a very large buyer under a long-term contract in that plant. Puts us in a different light. Puts us in a different situation. We're going to be looking at, and we are at the process, very early process in meeting with all of the other contracting parties and ownership. Total count of parties we on that we have.
36 Utah municipalities and 6 Southern California municipalities.
So there's a lot of people to bring to the table, and despite the fact that the department is, if you will, kind of the big dog in that group, we have to do things in a way that work for all the parties together on that. And as a result, we're in discussions with all of those other parties on timing, both in terms of what we do to replace that after that period, and to take a look at what are alternative fuel options, repowering options, total plant replacement options, because unfortunately, we can't pull the trigger alone on doing that. So we're moving down. That's not only do we move forward with Navajo because it has a higher relative emission of carbon per megawatt, it's also one that we had the ability to have, more legal degrees of freedom to act on our own. So we're working on it. We're working that direction. It's just a harder nut to crack on it. Be hearing more on that in the future as we kind of work with our counterparties on that.
But you seem to think there's some possibility that we can move in that direction and get these plants powered down more quickly.
Well, I think there are. It's certainly a really big issue we need to address on that as well, is what do we replace that with, what's that cost, and when we have an obligation for payment, it's kind of like looking at taking your home at 60% of the way through the mortgage and saying, well, I'll pay off the rest of the mortgage and I'll go out and buy a new house too. So that's kind of the circumstance we're looking at, and I'm not making light of it. It is kind of similar to that kind of situation. So the numbers will be important, and what we want to do is be able to come back to you with what are those options. But I don't want to come back there with those options without having some tacit agreement of our other partners who are willing to deal with those options as well. So it's not a hide the ball issue. It's a matter of we've got to bring those pieces together before we can put that option on the table in the same fashion that we have put the option on the table with Navajo.
Okay, well, it's good to hear that that's in the process and we're making the effort. So hopefully the 2027 is a worst case scenario and it turns out much better in that regard.
That's our hope as well.
And lastly, just as far as the rates, do we know yet if we put this entire package together roughly at the dollars that are being proposed, what that would do in terms of a rate increase over that period of time?
Well, we did.
Clearly, it's an important but an expensive package. I think certainly if we're going to do it, it's not something we want to do every year. We want to do it presumably in one increase, let people know what they're in for, and do it in a very transparent way.
So in the integrated resource plan, we laid out these investments over the next 20 years, and we did a very high level possible rate impact analysis. Now, what we haven't done, and this is where the rate piece really picks up, is we haven't looked at every single financial ratio. We haven't looked at the ratings and all the detail that's necessary for a true rate analysis. But with these investments going forward the next 20 years, it averages about 3 to 4% increase every year for the next 20 years. But it is front-loaded because of our AQMD settlement agreement, ocean water cooling, and some of the other required actions like renewables. So it's front-loaded so that over the next 5 years, it's a 5 to 8% range per year, 5 to 8% per year over the next 5 years is the kind of the range that we're looking at for these types of investments.
Does that range take us to a point where our rates would be higher than PG&E and Edison and other private companies, or are we still lower even in that scenario?
Well, I think the answer to that is I'm not totally sure as we sit here right now, and the reason for that being what we've laid out here is kind of a gross level cut on that, and it doesn't take into effect all the differences of what's this do if we lay this out and we finance it out. What are things like details like debt service coverage ratios and percent of capitalization, all those things that sound like little bothering annoyances that happen to be pretty important with respect to what our costs are and how much we have to raise rates to make sure that we have the cash flow necessary for that. So to put it on an apples and apples basis right now, I can't sit and tell you, other than we can certainly tell you that Edison, San Diego, and PG&E all have similar plans as they ramp up to get up to their 33%, as they ramp up to get up even higher than what they're at right now on their energy efficiency programs. And there's nothing that they have that they can do that I can see that's going to be a lower cost increment than ours, in as much as to the extent that we do financing, anything that we finance cheaper than they do, for starters. And
so there's no reason to think then that we would be very likely to have higher rates than they do, because if they have the same
in an abundance of caution, I would say it's our expectation that we would be able to stay below their rates, but that's only minimal comfort when you're taking a look at overall, what's the overall rate effect that we're looking at. So one of the things that I think that's important, that's why I tried to segment this at the beginning of our discussion, to say you're going to be seeing a lot more information here, certainly over the next 5 years of this plan, because that's where we can really get our arms around it pretty definitively and lay out what does this mean as we put this into. We're putting this into our revenue requirements, our cash models, our rate models right now, to get that information out there. And our hopes are to be able to, at the same time, be able to compare that to the recently announced plans that, certainly from SoCal Edison, for example, who's coming out with a three-year rate plan themselves, and try to put that into context.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Koretz, and thank you, Mr. Krikorian. Just to wind up for today, and to tell those who are in attendance and listening, we're going to take this draft of the IRP and the motions under items 2 and 3, and they're going to be continued for 45 days to allow for the third-party review process to be conducted by the CAO, the Chief Administrative Officer, and the Chief Legislative Analyst Office, so we can get the reports on file when we come back, and we'll have some other perspectives from which to draw. I think the common thread throughout all of this conversation, and I hate this expression because it's kind of stupid, but the big elephant in the room is I hate it, it's just stupid, but it's the rate, the potential for rate increases, and for us, I think not only the potential for rate increases, but also what options we have within that menu as to how to finance, how to address these changes. And that's obviously going to lead us right into an overall budget discussion, the various funds, accounts, and the way that the department is managed. And it's a dissection that we haven't had in its entirety. And over the past several years, I think we've been in a piecemeal triage situation. And I would suspect that everybody's tired of that. Look forward to working through this. Today actually was much better than I expected, and I'm happy for that, and to look forward to working through that. But for me, that is the common thread throughout all this, because I think we have to be able to not only make an informed decision, help working with you to develop this IRP that's a reflection of our values and our priorities, but I think it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we have full disclosure so that we make decisions and we make it based on full information, or as complete information as we can possibly derive, not just from you, but from CLA, from CAO, and any other third-party input from which we can draw to make those choices and decisions that are going to be extremely difficult to make. So with that, we'll be back, and I think in about 45 days, which would put us at, the end of March?
Towards the end of March.
Okay.
And at that point, what we anticipate working with the department on this is basically
Great.
wherever they're at in that process, we are working with them on whatever emanates from the IRP, if there is a rate proposal, which we imagine there would be, and what that process would look like, which we already have in place from previous reviews.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we'll give you status at that point.
Thank you.
And Madam Chair, I think, as I indicated before, I think actually this timing will work pretty well. Maybe a week difference here or there, but at the end of the day, we will have more information. We will have that more granular information with regard to how this affects rates in a way, and we're definitely striving forward. And I can tell you that the staff department and our management team here has been working solidly to get things and try to compartmentalize these things so we can compare and contrast and look at them to see what the trade-offs are associated with that, and what are these effects, so that we can take the framework that we built here in this IRP to be able to go forward and say, all right, now in the near term, the next, say, 5-year period of time, which is a period that we have the greatest certainty over, and you know, probably the most important to us, is to see how does that sort out in our rates, and so we are not making long-term plans in a vacuum, and we do know what these costs are, and the fact that there are some choices that we have, and we can get group participation in those choices, so it's not just a matter of the department making a choice and saying, well, here's what you've got.
And in looking at that, even when you examine the issue of restoration of our infrastructure, you look at the parts of the city that are the oldest parts of the city where we've had significant growth and a greater load on the infrastructure, both on water and on power, versus parts of the city that may be newer and have come along later with subdivisions, and along with subdivisions, you know, came the construction of new infrastructure and new hookups into our water and power system, and they may not be experiencing the same problems. So, you know, we won't be able to have broad brushstrokes in the discussion about that, because I mean, I don't know that we need to get down to every single census tract, because that would take us for the next 10 years, but, you know, we have to recognize that there are nuances even within grids or sections of the communities that make a part of the city of Los Angeles and the service areas. So I'm looking forward to, you know, having that discussion. So with that, we will move this for 45 days, come back again. Thank you for your time very, very much, and your patience and your diligence in getting us to this day.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then that marks the end of 1, 2, and 3. And now we will have a redo, second appearance by Dr. Williams for the public comment portion of the meeting. For those items that are not on the agenda, this is the time to come forward. Yikes. Good luck. Okay, Dr. Williams. You're on. Pull the mic up.
It's too far down. Dr. Clyde Williams, El Sereno. We'd like to see a similar effort on the part of the Bureau of Sanitation Urban Stormwater Program. Because you might say it's the other utility infrastructure project which very few people know, and it all goes in now to the county tax roll. And that the LA County will be taxing us for stormwater projects. And again, based upon almost a 2-year ago study, they were recommending $8 billion worth of projects during the next 10 years. And that they themselves, in the Bureau of Sanitation, in fact, indicated a 6 to 10% O&M fee on $8 billion. The Prop O is only the beginning. It's only $500 million. Okay, that's only $45 million each and every year. So somewhat like DWP, we'd like to have the Board of Public Works, Department of Public Works, Bureau of Sanitation, Urban Stormwater, provide us with an integrated stormwater plan, how much it's going to cost, and what is the life of project cost for this, and how is it going to be shared amongst the taxpayers of the city of Los Angeles. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Williams. No one else is coming forward to speak during the public comment period. And if not, then the meeting is adjourned, and thank you to everybody for being so patient today. Thank you.